2020 has been a very strange year for everyone, and that also includes video game companies. One of the strangest companies of the year, though, definitely has to be Nintendo. What was thought to be a potentially huge year for the company has become a pretty quiet affair, but according to rumors and various leaks, that seems to be changing very soon. I mean, let's be real. Do you really think Pikmin 3 is going to be the only Nintendo Switch game for the rest of the year? All of this, though, is of course contingent on one major thing: the Super Mario 35th Anniversary Collection. 2020 marks 35 years since Super Mario Bros. Released on the Nintendo Entertainment System, and from what we have heard, Nintendo is planning a big celebration for Mario's 35th birthday. Depending on when you're watching this video, it may have already been announced and potentially revealed, but from what we have gathered so far, it seems that Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, and Super Mario Galaxy will all be coming to the Nintendo Switch with some quality of life improvements, such as things like HD textures and widescreen support. After that, Super Mario 3D World seems to be getting a deluxe treatment that is also coming to the Nintendo Switch with some potentially new features added into that game. Be sure to check out my video talking more in depth about the Super Mario 35th Anniversary Collection for more details on that. But obviously, Super Mario isn't the topic of this video or the title or the thumbnail. It's The Legend of Zelda. Well, coincidentally, The Legend of Zelda is also celebrating its 35th anniversary, but in 2021, with 35 years since the original Legend of Zelda released on the Nintendo Entertainment System. New clues are starting to shape up something very interesting, a possible huge celebration for the Zelda franchise in 2021, similar to what we are expecting to see with Mario in 2020. So in this video, I want to go over the things that are leading up to this speculation and what sort of things we could potentially expect to see in 2021 from the Legend of Zelda franchise. What's going on, guys? I'm RGT85. If this is your first time on the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. But without any further ado, let's talk about The Legend of Zelda in 2021. What sort of things I hope to see, what sort of things we should expect, and what sort of things would just be absolutely awesome if it does happen. So like I said, 2021 is the 35th anniversary of the original Legend of Zelda game, and really, the Legend of Zelda franchise is one of Nintendo's most important franchises. It's always been one of the best-selling franchises, it's always been one of the most popular franchises, both fans and critics, so the Legend of Zelda definitely deserves some celebration. Now, a lot of this is sort of contingent on something that was discovered by a Twitter user by the name of Nazarus07, and he actually found something very interesting. Earlier, Nintendo had published some new trademarks for the Mario franchise, consisting of a whole bunch of different things, and it seems like back in July, The Legend of Zelda got the exact same sort of treatment. When you look at these two trademarks side by side, they are eerily identical, which makes a lot of sense because of course Nintendo would want to cover their trademarks and their IPs, but these are actually new trademarks for things like video games, merchandising, and even shampoo if you want to sort of take a bath with Mario and Zelda. I actually think there was a Mario shampoo or a Mario soap when I was a kid. That's kind of weird to think about. But obviously, if Nintendo is going through with the Super Mario 35th anniversary celebration, they would want to have all these new trademarks in place so that they could protect their IP, which is something they would want to do with The Legend of Zelda as well. And I think there's actually been some seeds planted already in 2020 to sort of lead us to believe that something will be happening big with the Zelda franchise in 2021. The first thing we need to talk about is Cadence of Hyrule, which is arguably one of the strangest and most interesting and unique games on the Nintendo Switch, and it's not because of the interesting gameplay that the game offers. It's because of the fact that Nintendo essentially licensed out the Zelda IP to a smaller independent studio. This obviously shows a lot of trust in this studio, but it also shows that Nintendo is willing to do different things with the Zelda franchise. Looking back at the latest Nintendo Direct presentation that was strictly focused on third-party developers, what was the first game that was talked about during that presentation? Cadence of Hyrule. Cadence of Hyrule was getting some new DLC added into the game, and of course, this was all contingent on the Legend of Zelda franchise because that's the real draw to this game. So I think Nintendo putting that DLC front and center goes to show that they want people to have Zelda on their minds. And while it might not be a mainline Zelda game or anything, they want Nintendo fans to have Zelda on their minds. When it comes down to things, businesses do things for a reason. When somebody tweets out something from a business account, there's logic behind it. There is something that they want you to see. There's something they want you to think about. There's something that they want you to feel with every social media post, every YouTube trailer that's posted, and every sort of lineup of games that are announced for things. I think this was a very calculated decision by Nintendo to remind people of the Legend of Zelda franchise. Of course, when talking about the Legend of Zelda franchise, you have to talk about the most successful Legend of Zelda game of all time in terms of sales, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild for the Nintendo Switch. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is of course getting a sequel. Many people felt that this game was potentially going to be a holiday 2020 game to sort of combat the launches of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. There was also that rumor that voice acting was completed on the game, but it seemed like that may have just been some sort of mistranslation from a Spanish website that people just sort of ran away with. I definitely was hopeful at the beginning of the year that Zelda could be coming in 2020, but as the year went on, I definitely started to change my mind on it. I think that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 makes more sense as a 2021 game, especially considering the fact that, well, it's Zelda's 35th anniversary celebration. So what better way than to announce a brand new Zelda game and reveal and release a brand new Zelda game in 2021? Of course, we know that development is well underway with this game, and I think this game has potential to build upon and even supersede what we saw in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild for several different reasons. First off, you have to remember, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild wasn't intended to be a Nintendo Switch game, it was intended to be a Nintendo Wii U game. You had to factor in things like a weaker processor that the Wii U has versus the Nintendo Switch, plus the gamepad. By building the groundwork in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, though, I feel that Nintendo is now at a big advantage when it comes to the Nintendo Switch, with being able to do things like utilizing the additional hardware power that the Nintendo Switch has over the Nintendo Wii U. What's more is, this is a very similar situation to what we saw with the Ocarina of Time and Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask on the N64. Both games were built upon the same engine, the Ocarina of Time engine, but looking at these two games side by side, they are vastly different experiences. All because the engine is essentially going to be the same in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. If anything, it means that it's a good thing, because they have that initial groundwork in place so that they can do things like create new experiences within this world that they have created and this timeline that they have created without having to do things like start from scratch with the game engine. And while some people feel that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 could be potentially a spring 2021 game for the Nintendo Switch, I think it makes a little bit more sense to be a holiday 2021 release, especially if Nintendo is planning a big celebration for the franchise. I guess a new game in the franchise would be cool, but that's not really a celebration. I would think bringing more classic Zelda games to the Nintendo Switch would be more in line with what we are expecting them to do with Super Mario 35th Anniversary, and would make a lot of sense to do it on the Nintendo Switch with, of course, the Legend of Zelda franchise. And it's not outside the realm of possibility for Nintendo to do something like this because, well, they already have if you look back at their history. On the Nintendo GameCube, you got two different versions of Legend of Zelda compilations that were released on the system that featured various Zelda games, including the NES games and the N64 games. So Nintendo definitely likes to do these compilations, and they have done them in the past, so putting a compilation like this on the Nintendo Switch would make a lot of sense. Imagine playing The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time in 1080p with upgraded textures and widescreen support on your HD television. Like, that would be an absolutely breathtaking experience, and I think would bring a lot of people back to a sort of simpler time in their lives when playing The Legend of Zelda was one of your main priorities. Of course, the N64 games make the most sense to be coming to the Nintendo Switch in 2021 for a celebration, but I also think you have to look at more obscure games like potentially Skyward Sword. Now, Skyward Sword wasn't a bad game or anything like that. I wasn't a huge fan of the controls of the game, but one thing that really held the game back was the Nintendo Wii's hardware. The game had a beautiful visual style, but unfortunately, the Nintendo Wii was not an HD system. Nintendo wasn't developing HD games at those times, so the game does definitely look dated by today's standards. But taking that beautiful graphics engine and polishing it up to HD visuals would look absolutely spectacular. And maybe Nintendo could even find a way to shoehorn in some traditional controls into that game so that everyone can enjoy it. Yes, the game was sort of built on the Wiimote, but let's be real, Nintendo can fix this and make it a more traditional controller style game if they wanted to do such. So re-releasing classic Legend of Zelda games with quality of life improvements on the Nintendo Switch in the earlier part of 2021 would be a great way to start out this celebration for the Legend of Zelda 35th anniversary, and I think would make a lot of sense. You could really sort of have a year of Zelda by doing things like that. And I think that there's another facet that you can look forward to as well with the Nintendo Switch's online service. Many people are expecting more obscure games to be added to the Nintendo Switch's online service in the Mario franchise whenever the Super Mario 35th anniversary is revealed. And I feel like The Legend of Zelda would be perfect for that as well, especially considering that two games are often wanted to be played, but can't unless you have a Game Boy Advance. Those being The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap and The Legend of Zelda Four Swords. Now, of course, that would be contingent on Nintendo adding Game Boy into the Nintendo Switch's online service, but many people seem to think that that will be the next system, whether it's the standard Game Boy or the Game Boy Advance. I personally feel that the standard Game Boy may even be overlooked and that Nintendo will jump straight to the Game Boy Advance to put on the Nintendo Switch's online service. Then you could add in these two games, which have been re-released on things like the Nintendo 3DS and the Nintendo Wii U's Virtual Console, to give people even more reasons to be excited for The Legend of Zelda for its 35th anniversary in 2021. I think when you really sit down and think about it, it makes perfect sense for Nintendo to do something like this. Of course, like I said, a lot of this is just based on speculation, and it's pretty contingent on whether or not the Super Mario 35th Anniversary Collection ends up happening. But I think at this point in time, most people feel that this is a foregone conclusion. Any day now, Nintendo can drop the Super Mario 35th Anniversary Collection announcement, and everyone will be going crazy for this. And I feel like if and when they do, because I definitely think they will, that you need to start thinking about other compilations for the Nintendo Switch when it comes to their mainline games. And the Legend of Zelda franchise makes perfect sense to be getting this same sort of treatment in 2021, especially considering the fact that Nintendo could potentially release The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 in 2021 as well, which would just make for a crazy year. But you know, it's a shame, because after this, you got your Mario celebration, you got your Zelda celebration. There's really nothing to celebrate in 2022 that's getting a 35th anniversary. Or wait, is there?